Welcome to Let's Talk Space Medicine. I'm Kyle Anderson, your medical student, space nerd host. For your listening entertainment, I gather my other medically inclined space nerd friends to talk all things space medicine. With our powers combined, we hope to explore and entertain the medical questions that stand between us and the stars. Today's episode, Space Vision. Orbit changes in orbit. During this episode, I worked with our new space nerd friend, Spencer, a medical student at Florida State University, to try to answer the question, do ocular disturbances preferentially affect men in spaceflight? And if so, why? As a brief disclaimer, anything discussed on Let's Talk Space Medicine should not be considered medical advice, and is therefore not a substitute for seeking medical help from a doctor. We are simply interested in entertaining topics within the field of space medicine. Today's episode begins with a fictional case study. You are a flight surgeon who is taking care of an astronaut who is returning from a 6-month stay on the International Space Station on board a Soyuz spacecraft. You determine the scene is safe and extricate your patient successfully with the help of other personnel, and promptly move your patient to a temporary shelter for examination and testing. You first ask your patient to walk several paces as you examine coordination and gait. You notice that the patient has difficulty in executing this task, needing to stabilize with the help of other personnel on scene to prevent a fall on several occasions. When questioning further, the patient does report a significant decrease in visual acuity recently. As a result, you perform an examination of his retina through fundoscopy and note striae in the retina and inflammation around the optic nerve. You also notice the back of the eye is also flatter. So, as the flight surgeon on scene, what etiology may be accounting for this recent lack of visual acuity? Option A, neurovestibular reacclimation. Option B, ocular muscle weakness. Option C, spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. As you might have guessed, spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, or SANS, is the correct response and is the topic of this episode. It so happens that this fictional case study is based off of a real NASA astronaut, John Phillips, who spent 6 months aboard the International Space Station in 2005, and actually had vision deterioration from 20/20 vision to 20/100 vision upon returning back to Earth. Disturbances to the eyes during extended stays in microgravity are common, occurring in the vast majority of astronauts, roughly 75%, that travel to the International Space Station, and appear to affect men more than women, 83% versus 32% respectively. Comprised of a constellation of both structural and functional changes to the orbit during spaceflight, SANS can be characterized by optic disc edema, globe flattening, choroidal and retinal folds, as well as hyperoptic refractive error shifts and areas of the retina that are ischemic that altogether result in deterioration of visual acuity. However, while SANS has been largely characterized, the etiology and biological mechanism for this apparent sex preference remains unclear. The current thinking is that SANS is caused by either the cephalic fluid shift or the hypercapnic conditions aboard the International Space Station. As a brief review, the cephalic fluid shift is the general tendency of fluids to shift to the upper body, causing many physiological changes, including increases in intracranial pressure. As a result of this fluid shift, the gradient between the intracranial pressure and the intraocular pressure could result in flattening of the globe and dilation of the optic nerve sheath, as well as optic disc edema. And this could contribute to the development of SANS. Increases in carbon dioxide, or hypercapnia, is also well known to alter intracranial pressure, where elevated PCO2 can cause significant vasodilation of cerebral arteries, and when combined with the upward fluid shift, this may lead to an increased exacerbation of SANS. At this point, it appears likely that both the cephalic fluid shifts as well as the hypercapnic conditions are contributing to the development of SANS, and therefore any differences in the physiological response based on sex may argue for the biological basis for this apparent sex preference. In one study, 14 out of 17, or roughly 82%, of males had evidence of SANS compared to only 5 of 8, or 32% of females. Importantly, the female crew members also presented with less severe signs and symptoms than their male counterparts, further suggesting that a biological mechanism does explain the sex preferences of SANS. Furthermore, data from a parabolic flight observed that intracranial pressure changes during weightlessness was lower in female subjects than in males. In addition, female astronauts are known to have demonstrably higher vascular compliance compared to men, which could then attenuate the cephalic fluid shifts causing SANS in female astronauts. It is also important to note that male and female astronauts aboard the ISS experience the same level of ambient CO2 levels, yet the women develop SANS less frequently and less severely. This evidence further demonstrates the likelihood of there being a sex preference of SANS. While the biological explanation of SANS affecting males more than females is still being worked out, all of these data together do suggest that there is an actual biological mechanism. However, there is still a lot we do not know about SANS, and the apparent sex preference could still be the result of a participation bias. As of March 2021, only 65 women have flown to space, as opposed to 501 men. As a result, the small sample size could play a large role in the discrepancy between the incidence of SANS among men and women. Luckily, this is changing, as NASA looks to send the first female to step foot on the moon during the upcoming Artemis missions. While the debate of whether SANS is driven by a biological mechanism or the result of a participation bias is certainly an interesting question, it is still a medical consequence of spaceflight that needs to be addressed before we can land on the moon and Mars and have sustained colonies there. So, how can it be medically managed? Perhaps most simply, SANS can be corrected by the use of glasses or contacts. Although continuously changing glasses or increasing contact strength as SANS progresses seems like a drawback that makes prevention of SANS preferable. Due to the etiology of SANS we discussed previously, preventative measures could likely target either lowering intracranial pressure or increasing intraocular pressure, as either of these actions would decrease the force gradient between the brain and the eyes. One device that may prove useful in this scenario is a pressure suit that applies a 20 millimeter of mercury negative pressure to lower limbs that could counteract the upward fluid shifts of bodily fluids seen in low gravity, effectively lowering the intracranial pressure and decreasing the risk of SANS. Another more simple idea is to have astronauts wear commercially available swimming goggles, as these goggles effectively increase the intraocular pressure by about 1 to 2 millimeters of mercury, which could help the eye oppose the forward force of the increasing intracranial pressure. While both of these methods have shown promising findings in several studies, there is still, coincidentally, a discrepancy in how many women versus men were used in these studies, showing the importance of both using male and female subjects in biomedical research, as well as having a well-controlled study design. So, what do you think? Is SANS due to differing biological responses to regulating intracranial pressure between men and women? Or is this simply due to a discrepancy in the amount of females being sent to space, resulting in a low sample size? Should astronauts just wear ever-increasing strength prescription glasses? Or should a lower body negative pressure suit or swim goggles be used as a treatment? Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Space Medicine. If you want to continue the discussion and meet more fellow space nerds, be sure to check out @TalkSpaceMed on Twitter and the Let's Talk Space Medicine server on Discord. Today's episode is actually brought to you by that Discord server, where Spencer approached me and we worked together to make the script. Spencer is a medical student at Florida State University and founder of the AMSRO chapter at FSU, or the Aerospace Medicine Student and Resident Organization. He can be contacted on the Discord server, as well as directly emailed at sk19bo@fsu.edu for any further questions. Thanks, and see you next episode.